after Netanyahu was embarrassed by the retraction of the story about 40 beheaded babies. So if we go back to like October 8th, CNN and Biden begin telling this phony story about 40 beheaded babies. They are both forced to retract. Netanyahu puts out an image of some burned body parts, says it's a baby, and then flash forward to this fundraiser in Las Vegas where these first responders are saying that there was a baby baked in an oven based on body parts they had in a bag, which were pressed against a heating element. Now put two and two together. What kind of heating element could have created that much heat to char a body part, which didn't even belong to a baby, but was put forward by Netanyahu to save face? It was likely a Hellfire missile, and body parts that had been blown to bits by a Hellfire missile, which were likely an Israeli citizen, but could have been someone from Gaza, are being put forward as an Israeli baby. But there's only, if you look at the confirmed death count, only one Israeli baby was killed. And it's, horrible and tragic. It was a 10-month-old baby named Millie Cohen who was accidentally shot by a Hamas gunman in an exchange of fire. And more reporting will come out about this. But you can look at the confirmed death toll at Hearts. There's no other baby. There's no baby burned in an oven. No one's even saying that. So what we're looking at is the most horrific, lurid propaganda, which is bogus, all derives from apparent friendly fire and is being spun in order to justify the actual beheading of babies with missiles in the Gaza Strip and the extermination, the systematic extermination of an entire society. I mean, a senior security source, Israeli security source, told Yediot Aharonot, the top Israeli tabloid, that 20,000 people had been killed in Gaza. I personally think that could be an overcount, and they're just trying to boast to the Israeli public about how many people they've killed to satisfy the bloodlust of the public after October 7th. But if that's true, that's like 1% of the entire population, which is definitely qualifies as genocide. And so the Israeli military and the prime minister's office, Netanyahu's office, are recycling October 7th atrocities, and they're also introducing new deceptions in order to try to keep the media's lens focused on October 7th now that it is starting to home in on the horror of Gaza. And we have all these new stories about babies baked in ovens. We've heard stories about babies cut out of mothers' wombs by so-called Hamas terrorists, rape, gang rape, women after being taken captive, gang raped in the streets in Gaza City. All of these lies were spun out. And of course, the 40 beheaded babies repeated by Biden, who claimed he'd seen photographs. All of these lies were repeated and put forward in order to give Israel the latitude to carry out this genocidal assault that we're now witnessing. And we can see Biden was so stunned by the propaganda that was being pushed on him by Netanyahu's office and the pro-Israel media that he immediately caved. And Tony Blinken, in his recent Senate testimony, also repeated some of these lies. So I'm still trying to unpack it, because it's these lies that went beyond the actual killings and atrocities that were committed by gunmen from the Gaza Strip on October 7th that have made it possible for Israel to target and exterminate hundreds of entire families in the Gaza Strip, as well as hospitals and medical centers. So I started my investigation when testimony started to filter out in Israeli media, which contravened the official story of October 7th. And the official story, which has been told to Americans and Israelis, is that Hamas, quote unquote, terrorists stormed into southern Israel and began just shooting and killing people at random, then burned them alive, tied up entire families in their homes, and then burned them all somehow, melted cars and burned people in their cars as they were trying to flee, and carried out this gigantic mass shooting. And it does appear clear that many non-combatants, Israeli non-combatants, were shot by Hamas gunmen, but that's kind of where the official story stops. And what I was able to determine from these testimonies, as well as just a basic and visual analysis of the photos that the Israeli foreign ministry and prime minister's office were putting forward, was that Israel used disproportionate force on its own citizens in order to dislodge a politically driven military offensive by Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which was aimed at extracting political concessions from the state of Israel, which had been besieging the Gaza Strip for 15 years.
And just the photographic evidence seems to contradict the statements that have come out of Jerusalem.
So it's important to understand that the main goal in this Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad military offensive was to gather as many captives as possible, particularly Israeli soldiers, in order to trigger the kind of prisoner exchange that was witnessed when Gilad Shalit in 2011 was released, the Israeli soldier who was taken in 2006, who was operating a tank outside Gaza, was taken in exchange for 1,027 Palestinian prisoners. Then you have Kibbutz Be'eri, which is it registered the most casualties of non-combatants. These were people who were caught in crossfire. Hamas gunmen had tried to take them captive, and there were standoffs in their homes. And by the time Israeli special forces arrived, many of those standoffs had been either ended, or they ended them simply by shelling people's homes with tanks. According to Yasmin Porat, who had fled the electronic music festival, which had come under attack, which was held right between Kibbutz Be'eri and Kibbutz Re'im, which also have military bases essentially embedded within them. It was held on the road between these two kibbutzim and came under attack. Many captives were taken. This woman, Yasmin Porat, fled to Kibbutz Be'eri, went into a home with her partner, and then they were then taken captive momentarily by gunmen. And she recounted to Israeli national radio that when the Israeli special forces arrived, they just started shooting everyone, and that most of the captives, along with the Hamas gunmen, were caught in the crossfire, and that everyone was killed except for her and her captor, who used her as a kind of human shield in order to guarantee his own safety when he surrendered. She saw her own partner, whose hands had been bound by her captors, get shot by Israeli special forces, and then they lobbed 2 tank shells into the home that she had been in. So if you look at the pictures of Kibbutz Be'eri, they look like homes in Gaza that I've seen, or you may have seen, that came under shelling from Israeli tanks and Israeli artillery. There's no way that Hamas gunmen could have done that much structural damage to this entire kibbutz with just the small arms that they were equipped with, Kalashnikovs and some RPGs. So, and I-24, Israeli Foreign Ministry sponsored propaganda network, actually went to this kibbutz on a guided tour and said they saw tank tracks everywhere. It's obvious what happened there. And it was stated clearly by the security coordinator of Kibbutz Be'eri, who you quoted at the top of this interview. He was on a hotline with the Israeli military command, and they decided to shell houses on top of their occupants, including Israeli civilians. Now, why were they doing this? As you mentioned, there's the Hannibal Directive, this secret directive, well, a once secret directive that was introduced after Israel entered into a major prisoner swap with, I believe, the PFLP-GC, which operates out of Syria, in exchange for Ahmed Jibril and hundreds of other prisoners, in order to get back some Israeli soldiers who I think had been taken in the Lebanese civil war.
I think it was only 3. I don't think it was very.
Yeah, it was 3.
Yeah.
And so this is a politically painful prisoner swap, and the Israeli public was furious, and the right-wing politicians were furious. So they introduced this directive named for the Carthaginian general Hannibal, who took his own life. He took poison rather than be taken captive by the enemy. And it authorizes Israeli commanders to kill their own soldiers if they're taken captive by the enemy in order to prevent such a prisoner swap from taking place. And it was used again. This is kind of when it got exposed in 2014, August 1st, 2014, what's known as Black Friday in southern Gaza. And I was actually there in the aftermath of this massacre. A lieutenant named Hadar Golden was taken by Hamas fighters. He was in the field. Israel broke a ceasefire and started attacking around the southern city of Rafah. And the Israeli military command authorized airstrikes, artillery strikes, tank fire to bring the full wrath of the Israeli military onto this area in order to make sure that this soldier did not get taken alive. And over 100 people in Rafah were killed in this massacre. The morgues were filling up. It was hideous. I actually visited a hospital called Kuwaiti Hospital, which is now under attack again. And because the mortuaries were so full of bodies on this day, they actually had to bring in ice cream coolers to store the bodies of babies. The doctor actually who I interviewed about that, his entire family was killed about a week and a half ago after he refused Israeli orders to evacuate Kuwaiti Hospital. But back to the Hannibal directive, we have to question whether it was put into play on October 7th, because we not only have the Erez crossing, where many soldiers were killed, and if you look at the aftermath, the roof was clearly brought down. There's serious structural damage to the roof of Erez crossing. You have Kibbutz Be'eri, where there was tank shelling, and then you have these Apache helicopter pilots in the air who were stating in their testimonies in Hebrew to Israeli media that they had no intelligence, no way of distinguishing civilian from combatant on the ground, and yet they were told to empty their tanks, just completely unload their ammo, then head back to the base, get filled up again, reload, and then go shoot as many cars and people as they can on the ground. Pure chaos. These testimonies have been totally ignored, by the way, by Western media. What were they encouraged to kill captives or shoot cars that they thought contained captives? We don't know. What we do know is there were orders from the top to kill Israeli civilians if Hamas gunmen were around them in order to get the gunmen. And it's like the same doctrine, military doctrine that's being employed in Gaza. Any civilian is a target if they are the quote unquote terrorists' next door neighbor. Israel actually calls it the neighbor policy. Then you have the chaos of the Nova Electronic Music Festival. And it's there that it appears clear that after a lot of these Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad commando teams had left, this is an element that's left out in a lot of Western media. Many people from Gaza just started streaming in